Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is NURULHUDA binti ABDULLAH. My metric number 046244 and I am from group 3. And today our group will be present about the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees with regard to the principle of non-refoulement in Southeast Asia country. First of all, asylum seekers means someone is attacking for political protection from another country because they cannot return to their own country. He or she must prove that they face persecution in their home country due to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinions. In contrast, a refugee is someone who has been recognized under the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugee to be a refugee. The convention defines a refugee as any person who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reason of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality, or is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence as a result of such event, is unable or owing to such fear is unwilling to return to it. And the definition of the refugee does not cover other individuals or groups of people who leave their country only because of war or other civil disturbance, famines, natural disaster, or in order to seek a better life. So as the UNHCR explains, refugees flee because of threat of persecution and cannot return safely to their homes in the prevailing circumstances. So under international human rights law, the principle of non-refoulement guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they would face torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment, and the other irreparable harm. This principle of non-refoulement also can be defined as an essential protection under international human rights, refugee, humanitarian, and customary law. However, most states in Southeast Asia are not a party to the 1951 Convention and have no regional agreement or domestic legislation concerning the rule of non-refoulement. So this principle asserts that states should not return refugees to their prior residence or country of origin if they have a well-founded fear of persecution. Scholars contend that non-refoulement has been elevated to the status of customary international law. This means that it prohibits states from transferring or removing individuals from their jurisdiction or effect control when there are substantial grounds for believing that the person would be at the risk to irreparable harm upon return, including persecution, torture, ill treatment, or other serious human rights violation. I think that's all from me.
The treatment of asylum seeker and refugee with regard to the principle of non-refoulement in Southeast Asia country. Firstly, around 8,000 Rohingya and Bangladeshi asylum seeker and migrant afloat in the Andaman Sea and Bay of Bengal in May 2015. Meanwhile, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia pushed back the boats, rebuffing them from their coastlines after delivering fuel and food. This response, which creates a humanitarian emergency, raises some important questions about the status of key norms of international refugee law in the region. International law offers no individual right to asylum, instead imposing a duty on state to refrain from refoulement. This refugee law prohibition has been strengthened by human rights law, which protect against the forced return of any person to a place where there is a risk to her life or risk of torture or inhuman or degrading treatment.
Assalamualaikum. My name is NADIRA ZAILAN. My metric number 047858. So based on the assignment given, the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees with regard to the principle of non-refoulement in Southeast Asian countries. So basically, the principle of non-refoulement guarantees that no one should be returned to a country where they should face a cruel or torture. So the principle of non-refoulement is now generally considered as the customary international law, which means that states are bound by the principle whether or not they have signed the Refugee Convention or other relevant human rights treaties. So there are only 3 states in Southeast Asia that are party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, which are Cambodia, East Timor and the Philippines. However, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia are not parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention, and they do not have domestic legislation that recognize refugee protection from refoulement, but they only relies on general human rights law. For example, in Thailand, the 1979 Immigration Act provides that asylum seekers and refugees that enter their countries are subject to arrested, imprisoned or expelled as a consequence of the law, similar to those in Malaysia and Indonesia. However, this law permits foreigner to live indefinitely in Thailand with the permission from the cabinet. So the asylum seekers and refugees may therefore live in Thailand, but at the discretion of the government.
Okay, now I will explain next point. Okay, to examine whether the treatment of asylum seekers and refugees with regard to the principle of non-refoulement in Southeast Asian countries, the actions of Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia amounted to refoulement, as Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia are not parties to the 1951 Refugee Convention and do not have domestic legislation recognizing refugees' protection from refoulement, relies on general human rights law. Indonesia and Thailand, for example, are parties to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights (ICCPR) and the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment or Punishment (CAT). Okay, that's all for me.
Next is the principle of non-refoulement under customary international law. Article 38, Clause B1, Clause B of the Statute of the International Court of Justice states that international customary as evidence of general practice accepted as law, as one of the source of a law, which is applied when deciding dispute accordance with the international law. For a rule to become part of a customary international law, there is 2 elements that required. Firstly is the consistent state practice, and also second one is the opinion juris, that the understanding held by the state and the practice at issue is obligatory due to the existence of a rule requiring it. The UNHCR argues that the ban of refugee refinement, as enshrined in Article 33 of 1951 Convention, and is subject to non-refoulement obligation under international human rights law, meet this criteria and is a customary law of international law. Therefore, this was bind with all states, including those states does not parties to the 1951 Convention or the 1967 Protocol. In this regard, UNHCR note that among other things, the practice of the countries that not sign large number of refugees, often in situation of mass incarceration. The principle of non-refoulement is now generally considered to be customary international law. This means that the countries are bound by this principle, whether they not or sign the Refugee Convention or the relevant human rights treaties in human rights treaties. In the Southeast Asia, only 3 countries as a party of 1951 Convention which is the three countries is East Timor, Philippines and Cambodia. However, the Thailand, Indonesia and Malaysia does not the parties of 1951 convention and does not have domestic legislation recognizing refugees protection from refoulement. They only relies on the general human rights law. For example, in the Malaysia, they receive the refugee, but they will send back the refugee at some future time. It because Malaysia think that they will have to bear the financial burden of being a host and instead have to deal with a various security risk social problem. That's all.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is IZZATI binti HILMI, metric number 046374. So, I would like to talk about the refoulement in Southeast Asian region. Alright, Southeast Asian states refer large number of asylum seekers, especially during the Indo-Chinese refugee crisis saw, both at land and sea border. So, according to the UNHCR in 2015, they reported that some states in the region had introduced increasingly restrictive policies. So, what is the restrictive policies? Okay, I give you an example. The first one is denying safe disembarkation or access at the airport and narrowing protection spaces and access to asylum. We are forbidden them from entering the country. And the second one is to increase in maritime pushback and instances of refoulement. Okay, why we can practice refoulement in Southeast Asia? First, because we openly give our stand that we're not ratifying the Refugee Convention. Maybe because we are not ready enough. We are not prepared to give the rights to the refugee as they want. And going back to the refoulement, Thailand and Malaysia both host in excess of 100,000 asylum seekers and refugees and have done so for decades. But still, they are not ratifying it because we are not able to. However, Indonesia treats asylum seekers and refugees with benevolent neglect, but rarely carries out rejection at the border or deportation. This happened because in the names of human rights, we still need to protect them and we cannot let them afloat on the water for many days and let them die because of starvation, health issues, whatever. We still accept them, but we cannot provide them with the rights that they want. So that's all. Thank you.
In conclusion, both countries, Malaysia and Indonesia, are agreed to provide temporary asylum to Rohingya asylum seekers and refugees. In other words, Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia did not explicitly acknowledge any non-refoulement obligation, instead pointing out that these measures were carried out on humanitarian grounds beyond their international obligations. Nevertheless, it is clear that the status of non-refoulement is in greater doubt than in many other regions in the world. Thank you very much.